Now is usually when our kiddos take off to kids worship. Middle schoolers head off to middle school land. Then we all take a nap, right? We're going to play hide and seek. I'm going to go hide and you seek me, right? Is that the way? Doing lost and found. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. Next weekend, I'm not going to be speaking, so I want you to come. Exciting. A friend of mine, Ken Freeman, is going to be here, and real excited about that. He is speaking at Camp Siloam next week, or not next week, the week after. So he's going to come in on Saturday night and Sunday. He's going to do both services for us to be in the area. So I want to encourage you to come. If you've got people that you're not sure about their relationship with Christ, he has the gift of evangelism, and he has a unique way of presenting the gospel, and he'll be coming and doing that and sharing it with us, and want to encourage you to come to be a part of that. And also in the back over here on the corner, we have Operation Shoebox. I know that usually takes place around Thanksgiving, but now is a good time to start purchasing stuff for that shoebox, especially, and there's a sheet back there that looks like this, has different things that you can buy throughout the season. They've got it down to an art form in the idea of when to buy certain stuff, and like right now is July, and so clothing items, back to school clothing items are on sale, things like that. You can do that. August is usually school supplies. September's games, things. And so you can begin to put your shoebox together, or several shoe boxes. That would be awesome to get started on that. And we're one of the unique opportunities we have to really spread the gospel throughout the world. I am real excited that Aaron is going to get to do his first overseas missions, to be out of the country. And thinking about that, I've always wanted students, high school students, by the time they graduate, at least have their passport and have done one overseas trip. I know that freaks parents out a lot because just the idea that he's flying by himself to catch up with the group in Honduras. So he gets to go through the Houston airport, and then on the way back, he gets to spend the whole day there, actually the whole night there. He's going to fly in at 5, and then he'll fly out the next morning like at 10 a.m. So he's going to explore the Houston airport. If he's anything like his dad, he'll find every nook and cranny in that place. But I would really like to be able to see high school students to do that, and I'd like to see us to push that as much as possible, because the world is at our fingertips, correct? I mean, we don't have... we have the best opportunity to reach the world now than probably any time in history. And it's so easy for us to be able to travel and to hit these different places. And so I just want to encourage you to think about that, because they have an opportunity to see the world differently than we have growing up. And so I want to encourage that, because it's going to be a unique opportunity that we'll continue to see these more and more students traveling and going to different countries. And I mean, I'd like to see them, college students, right after they graduate, spend 2 years in a foreign country before they start doing their job, in the sense of doing mission work. This will be our Mosaic way of reaching the world. All right, back to the series, Lost and Found, one that I'm working on. If you haven't been here, we've been talking about the lost parables that Jesus... They weren't lost. They were parables about lost that Jesus spoke. Luke recorded those. And as we look at this, Jesus, understanding he is a great storyteller. Must have been, because thousands of people were following him. We find at a certain point that they were just pushing in on him. And here we find in Luke chapter 15, verse 1, I don't have that for you. I just want to read it for you. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him." I think that's kind of cool, because tax collectors and sinners, they have their own people group, right? I mean, sinners are bad, right? We understand what sinners are. They're just bad people. But tax collectors, they had their own people group, all right? They were the worst of the worst. And so what's interesting, though, Not the fact that they were pushing near on Jesus, because Jesus did hang around people who were not quite like him. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, the religious elite, they were arguing, they were grumbling, they were mad because Jesus, he seemed to receive these people. And he ate with them. Can you imagine that? Now, think about this. Would you go to a homeless shelter just to eat with them? Now, I'm not serving them. We're all about that at times. We would go and prepare a meal and feed as many homeless people as possible. Might see somebody on the side of the road that needs help and stop over and help them, all kinds of things. But would you go hang out with people who are not like you? Would you go eat with them just to fellowship with them? Eat what they're eating. Sit where they're sitting. Letting that soak in a little bit. Because we'll help. Now, sometimes we even get frustrated because we're thinking, homeless people here in Arkansas? There are plenty of jobs. They should be able to get out there and get a job and, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get back after it. Somebody reminded me of the sign that went through Facebook. There was a guy over by Walmart that had a sign up. He was showing a sign that said, my drug dealer got arrested, need money for drugs, or whatever, something like that. I'm like, yeah. Yeah. And so the whole idea is, it's like, well, I'm not giving money to that guy. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't either. That's not what we're talking about. Well, we're talking about hanging with them. Being where they are. Not expecting them to be where we are. See, so many times as church people, we feel like, hey, we've got a great facility, we've got a great opportunity here, they should just come. If they would just come one time, we would change the world, right? Instead of us investing into their lives. And then inviting them to come. Investing and inviting. Jesus, being a great storyteller, again, in Jerusalem at this time, there was about 40,000 people in population. And it could swell up to 250,000 people at one time. Now think about this. That's a little smaller than Siloam. A little smaller than Fayetteville, bigger than Siloam. 40,000 people. So there are thousands of people pushing in on Jesus to hear him. And I know around here we freak out when there's a lot of people. I've known people that when X and A came in, they were ready to sell their farms and move because this place is just getting too big, right? But think about the early church. There was a time where Peter preached and 3,000 people got saved. We would totally flip out over that, right? And this is not just about getting bigger and better. This is just the fact that Jesus is hanging around people who are not like him. The religious leaders can't believe he's even doing that. And so Jesus tells 3 stories. And what I've asked is that you ask 3 questions in each of these stories. Who is God? Who am I? And what's my response? Now, the first story we looked at, we actually looked at the story here of the lost son, but we looked at the aspect of the older brother. Because Jesus is talking to the religious leaders. Like the older brother who served his father, worked on the farm, stayed there, did what he needed to do, tried to make his father happy, tried to please his father, but got really frustrated when the younger son came back and it seemed like everything was just okie dokie with the younger son, and the big celebration, and the older brother got really upset because the father didn't discipline him, the father just accepted him back. And he's like, why am I doing all this work? Why am I serving you all the time? You never throw parties for me. And the father says, you don't understand. You see, religious people have no grace for those who are not like them. We have no grace for those who are not like us. And the question we ask was, how do you treat and respond to those who are not like you? Then we looked at the story of the lost sheep. You have 100, you lose one, what do? Oh, I'll just write that off for tax purposes, right? No, we go find it. And if we find it, we celebrate. Farmers, you do that. You realize that maybe one of your cows have had a calf and you can't find it, and you start looking for it. When you find it alive, you get excited. You know, my mom calls me, hey, I found a calf. You know, it's like, all right, good. You know, that's money in the bank. And then we looked at the lost coin. The lost coin. Well, actually, let me back up a second. The lost sheep. Do we celebrate stories of those who were lost and then found? Do we hear their Jesus story? I mean, that's one way that as you get to know people, and you hear those little things, those little bits of information that they give you that let them know that they were a follower, and you can say, can you tell me your story? How did you come to know Christ? It's amazing to hear their stories. It's exciting to hear their stories. And you know what's interesting between the story of the lost sheep and the next story, the lost coin, is there are a phrase that Jesus uses in both of those stories that say this, that heaven celebrates when a sinner repents. That the angels just throw this big, magnificent celebration when someone turns and comes back to the Father. And we looked at the lost coin, the idea that you need to be a light in a dark place. You need to be a light in a dark place. Maybe where you work is really dark in the way that way people talk, way people act, all that stuff. Maybe you're the light there. You know, you may be frustrated with it, but you may be the only light that they need to see. You know, I give an example of the fact of one time where one of the sawmills I deliver logs to, there's a little boy there that is always hanging around the mill, and now he wants to be the logger preacher, because I guess I'm known as the logger preacher, okay? And so he wants to be that when he grows up. You know, and I'm like, man, out of two vocations, you really want to do logging and preaching? I mean, talk about a glutton for punishment. But the whole idea is be a light in the dark place, knowing that our world is really messed up, right? Our world is really messed up. There's a lot of bad things happen, whether it's good people or bad people, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's no respecter of persons. When bad stuff happens, it happens. And the idea that we need to help with our dreams, our desires, our goals that God has given us to help clean up this place. I think that's what's so unique in seeing the thumbprint of God on each of your lives, because we have the idea that we want to make this place better. In all reality, we want it to go back to like it was in the Garden of Eden. We think it can be better. We know it can be better. We try to make it better. That's the thumbprint of God on your life. And then the third thing we saw was seeking diligently those who were lost, weak and wounded, sick and sore. Are we about helping those people? Are we seeking out who we can help and encourage and strengthen and nurse back to health? So today we look into the story of the lost son, with the focus being on the younger son, the one who rebelled, the one who walked away. And in Luke chapter 15, verse 11, we find this. Here's the story. And there was a man, Jesus is talking, he says, there was a man who had two sons. Awesome. He had two boys. Great. Verse 12, the younger of them said, Father, I just wish you would die so I can get what's mine. I mean, in all reality, isn't that what he's saying? Father, give me the share of my part of the inheritance. I can't wait any longer. I'm out of here. Just give me what's coming, and I'm gone. You won't have to put up with me ever again. You know, I'm done with this family. I'm gone. And the father divided the property between the two boys. Now, dads, let me ask you something. If your sons come to you, 16, 17, 18, maybe even 21-year-old, and said, give me my portion. I want $250,000, and I'm just going to do what I want to do. Would you do that? No way. I'm not giving you a dime. You want to go on your own? Do it on your own. You'll figure it out. I'm keeping my portion. You know, I'm keeping your portion. But think about it. Every time August rolls around, I drive by the high school Gentry parking lot, and I see a 20, a 30, a 40, a 50, a $60,000 car sitting out there that we gave them the keys to drive that they have no business driving. I'm going, It's kind of freaky, isn't it? But the Father did something that we probably would never dream of doing. But Jesus is telling the story. It's his story. We'll let him tell it the way he wants. So he divided the property between them. Look at verse 13. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had, and he took off, he took a journey to a far country, and there he what? What is it? Squandered. Woo! Was that me or? That might have been me. All right. Hold my hands together. He squandered it. I mean, think about that. You would expect him to do that, right? This is not new information. We expect him to squander it. You give a guy that much money, what's he going to do with it? He's going to blow it. He didn't go off and invest it. He didn't go start a company. He just, wait a minute, I've got money. We kind of do the same thing. We have the idea, if we have this much money, then we're going to have this much time. If we have all of this, then look what we can do. I mean, we all have the same idea. If I had a little more time and a little more money, I could do a lot more things, right? He had a lot of money. He had some time. He thought, hey, this is going to last. And what happens? He lost it. How did he lose it? It wasn't a bad investment. Reckless living. Reckless living. He squandered it. Look at verse 14. And when he had spent everything, it's all gone. What happened? Economy tanked. Severe famine. And not just in the community that he lived, but in the whole country. Isn't that typical? Thought we had it. Things were going well our way. And then the economy crashed. Lost everything. Lost a job for no reason. Wrecked a truck. It's just, whatever it is, it just all of a sudden, something bad happened. And we have no control over it. Do you have control over your retirement? You don't. You can plan for it. You can invest into it. You can try to set up all the dominoes in the right place. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. You can have great ideas and start great businesses. Doesn't mean they're going to last. There are a lot of startup companies that fail. And a lot of it has to do with the idea that I think I can make this happen on my own. I'm not saying that God's not involved. Because in the story, you kind of see God is all over this situation. But look what happens. He began to have need, right? The question that rose up in my mind is, where are all his friends that were helping him spend all of his money? I mean, think about that. I know back in the 90s, just some information that you'll probably never use, but back in the 90s, around 1990, when Ryan was born, the lady from McDonald's who was receiving all of the net profit from McDonald's, you know how much she was making a day? $39 million a day. That's what she was getting. We're thinking, gosh, if I just had a percentage of that, that would be awesome, right? You know how much Michael Jackson was spending before he died a day? $5.4 million a day was what he was spending on his organization. And we're thinking, wow, how frivolous. Wow, if we had that much money, think of all the stuff that we could do. My question is, where are all his friends? He's in need. I mean, he's in so much need. Look at verse 15. So he went and he what? Hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country who sent him to feed what? Now, I know that doesn't mean a whole lot to you because most of you grew up on a farm where you spent time around pigs and cows and stuff like that. But Jesus is telling the story, and who's he talking to? He's talking to the religious elite as well as even the tax collectors and sinners. And what nationality are they? Jewish. Do they eat pigs? And can you imagine the whole crowd that when Jesus is telling this story, that he's saying that this boy hired himself out to slop the hogs? It's almost like the whole crowd went, we can't believe he did this. We can't believe that, oh man, of any job, why would he do that one? I mean, you and I have probably been in that situation. We've probably thought of that. If we were in that situation, I would never do this job. I'll never do this job. Growing up in the sawmill, I said I would never go back into logging and sawmilling again. Never say what? Because you never know what your situation is going to be and how God's going to use it to spin you out of where you are. And so here, he was to feed the pigs. Now look what happened in verse 16. He was so hungry that he wanted to eat the pods that the pigs were eating. But get this, no one would give him any. He's so hungry, he wants to eat what the pigs are eating, but no one's going to give him any food. And all of a sudden, look at verse 17. But when he what? What happened to him? He what? Came to himself. He realized something. I'm here struggling. I'm so hungry. My father's hired servants have it better than I have. They're getting at least 3 squares a day. I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. Look at verse 18. He develops a plan. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned. I have messed up. I can't believe I went this far, but I have. Against heaven and before you. I've sinned against God because I know what God wanted me to do. I know I shouldn't have done this, but I did it anyway. But I've also sinned against you. Verse 19, here's the plan. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And what's the next word? Treat me as one of your hired servants. Treat me as a hired servant. Treat me less than a son because I'm not worthy to be called a son. Don't give me any authority. Don't give me any responsibility other than I will work for you. I don't know, maybe this was going through his mind, the idea that, I messed up so bad that, at least I could go back and maybe help support my dad just by working. I'll get to eat, but maybe I can work really hard and at least just show the family that I'm there to make things better as a hired hand. Verse 20. And he arose, and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, what happened? His father saw him. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but I grew up out in the country, and if a car come by, well, if it came our way, either they were lost, because we lived at the end of a dirt road, we were the turnaround spot, or was the field man, or it was somebody coming to see us. And when we lived at Cave Springs, we lived out by Healing Springs when Marcia and I first got married. And so, living out there, it was anybody drive by, because there wasn't cars all the time. Now, I grew up I also spent time over here on Old 68, and I got used to traffic all the time. But just the fact, when you live out in the country, if somebody drives by, you have a tendency, if there's an open window or, a window close to you, you kind of look to see who's driving by, I mean, we used to sit there and open the windows at night just to listen to people who didn't live in the area when we lived in Healing Springs, because just right past our house there was this big dip, and you hear this, boom, and then they would go on, So one night I'm coming home, and it's late, and I've been on Marcia since we first got married about shutting off the lights, turning, save electricity, we got to pay bills, we only have so much for this, and so, and so anyway, I come home late one night, and being me, I saw this car come by, and I thought, perfect. Because I'm coming in at the same time, so she won't know that it's me. So I shut off the truck and going to coast in the driveway, and I'm going to sneak in the house because there's only one light on, and I'm going to scare her. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I had a brand new truck, and I've never had a truck that the steering wheel locked before. And when I shut it off, I locked the steering wheel. It's like, God. So I worked hard at this. I pushed the truck the rest of the way up the driveway. I snuck into the house, and I get almost to her. And you know how when you get that feeling, like parents, you remember, your kid comes to you in the middle of the night. It could be 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. They just look at you, and all of a sudden you're like, somebody's there. And it's like, I'm glad I didn't hit you, or choke you, or. But anyway, I get to this point, and all of a sudden she has that sense that somebody is there, and she begins to turn, and I tackle her on the bed where she's folding clothes. And we both just start laughing. I mean, just uncontrollable laughing until she realized, you just scared the living fire out of me. And then it was like, wham, wham. She just started waylaying me. Yes, she did get me back. I mean, she has 3 older brothers. So she learned, thanks, David, for teaching her how to punch. She's very good at it. And so the whole idea is that I believe, and men closer to my age, aren't you more aware of your surroundings than you were at 20? I mean, isn't it uncanny how you're working and you know when somebody walks up? Or your kids try to sneak up on you and you go, I know you're there. Dang, they walk off. You're working and there's somebody that comes up and you're in the middle of something, so you're going to wait till you get there. You don't even acknowledge them, but you know they're there, but you're focused. I used to get frustrated with my dad because somebody would come up to the sawmill and they would want to buy lumber. And I'm thinking, Dad, you should stop and sell lumber because money is what we need, right? And he would go, no, I need to finish this out. I can't just shut this thing down and start it back up every time I want to. It was a D6 Caterpillar engine. It's not easy to start and stop all the time. And I was like, oh, okay. The Father. I don't think the Father just sat there and watched for his younger son to show up day after day after day. The Father knew. He was lost, but the Father knew where he was, I'm sure. He had an idea. And he watched. And as he watched, as he's working, looking up the road, all of a sudden he realized, the way that kid walks, that's my boy. And he ran to him. And he ran to him. And he felt compassion. And he embraced him. And what did he do? He kissed him. That sign of showing him unconditional love. He kissed him. Verse 21. And the son said to him, okay, here's the rehearsed speech. Father, I've sinned. And I almost want to think at that point, the father is like, okay, you got it. Now, not even listening really to the rest of the story. But Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. And I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Look what happens, verse 22. But the father said to who? The servants. Not the son. The servants. Bring quickly the best robe. Think of it like this. This is a prince robe, signifying authority, signifying that he is a member of the family, signifying that he is important in the family. Remember the story of Joseph? He had a coat of what? Many colors. You know what's interesting about that story? Joseph was the oldest son of the woman that he loved. In other words, go back and read the story. You know, it's kind of a freaky story in the idea that here's this guy, Jacob, and he falls in love with this girl, and him and the father-in-law work out a deal. If you'll work 7 years, I'll let you marry her. Well, he worked very hard for 7 years, and when the wedding came, they did the wedding, and all of a sudden he woke up the next morning beside the older sister. Pulled a little switcheroo there. Now, guys, wouldn't you be frustrated? You know, you worked 7 years for this woman, and you get the homely older sister. I don't know. I'm just assuming that's what it is. I mean, because he said she couldn't get married. So you have to marry her first. And then he works another 7 years for the woman that he loves. And all of a sudden they start having babies, but the woman that he loves is not having any children. I mean, Reuben's the oldest. But Joseph gets the coat of many colors because he's the oldest of the woman that he loves. That's why all the other brothers are ticked off. Because he's special. Every family's got one, right? The golden child, you know, they get away with everything. You could be the oldest, youngest, I don't know. But just the whole idea, he all of a sudden signifies to everyone there, this is my son. I'm putting a robe on him, the best robe. And put a ring on his hand. That's his signature. That's his authority to do business. And put shoes on his feet. He's not poor. He's mine. Verse 23. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and what? Celebrate. You know, Jesus didn't use that heaven celebrates at one who repents and turns, but in the story here, Jesus uses this point that the Father brings a big celebration. The Father is the cause of celebration. And so as you see this, the Father says, let's throw a party. Let's throw a party. Because my son was lost. Now he's found. Now, he wasn't really lost. I knew where he was, but he's returned. My son was dead. And he wasn't really dead, but he was separated from the family. And now he's alive. You know what's interesting? Look at verse 24. This is not too far from many of us in our relationship with God. Because who's God in the story? The Father. Who are we? We're the Son. Because we've all been lost. We've all been separated. I mean, this story is really not much different than Genesis chapter 2. You know, we've all been younger sons at one point in the idea that we want what we want, when we want, how we want, with whom we want, no matter what we want. And that's what the younger son wanted. I mean, when you stop and think about it, we get lost in what we can see rather than what we can't see. The Pharisees were lost in what they could see rather than what they couldn't see. The sinners and the tax collectors were lost in what they could see, but not what they couldn't see. Let me explain it like this. We get so caught up in our stuff that we get lost. Not realizing that God is the stuff giver. He gives us this stuff for us to leverage it for His honor and His glory and His kingdom. But so many times we get caught up in, oh, but this is my little piece of property. Think about it like this. The younger son could have had so much more if he would have waited. If he would have waited and went through the proper channels, his inheritance would have been a lot more. He would have had a lot more to leverage. He would have learned a lot more about life. Not just learn, he would actually experience life in such a way that when he received that money, he would be ready to receive it and use it the way it needed to be used, hopefully. So many times we get focused on this world that we don't even think about, and we don't want to wait for what God has in store for us. So many times we misuse the things that God has given us rather than using them the way God designed them to be used. I mean, how many times, guys, have we used a crescent wrench as a hammer? I mean, it worked in a pinch, but, it didn't help the crescent wrench out that much. Grabbing a pair of pliers and stripping the corners off of a nut instead of finding the proper wrench that we needed to. I know, we get frustrated because the wrench I need is not where I need it. It's over here, or it's at the farm, or it's at the woods, or it's at, but we don't wait. We just want to get it done now. I just want to experience it now. I don't want to wait. I mean, this story is not much different than what happened in Genesis. Look at Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3, verses 3 through 8. This is not a story, made-up story. This is a real story. This is something that really happened. God made Adam and Eve. Now what's interesting is when Adam saw Eve, the way that he responded in that situation, the way that he said, "This is mine." He named all the animals. And when God presented Eve to Adam, he said, "Whoa, man." Get it? Whoa, man. But really what he was saying, out of all of creation, she's mine. She's mine. And then the serpent comes in and does a little switcheroo thing and kind of confuses everybody. But Adam is in the garden with her, and he does nothing. He chooses what he can see rather than what he can't see. He chooses his stuff over really what we should consider everything God's stuff. And when he heard, I think this is interesting, when he heard the sound of the Lord God walking. Now guys, I know you'll get this. One night, it was late, probably midnight or so, I hear a car driving down the lane by my house. Now, that's not unusual because it's a Tufco area, and so those guys travel, all kinds of time during the night. But I woke up to the sound and said, "That's Michael Davis's car. He's just toilet papered my house." So I get up, I walk outside. Sure enough, my house has been toilet papered, amongst a lot of other stuff that they've done over the years. So, of course, being a good man and taking care of his stuff, I go pull the toilet paper off before the dew hits it or the rain, and makes it worse. So I pull the toilet paper off. I hear his car coming back from Gentry. And he coasts down by my house. He shut the car off and he's coasting by. And I just back up into the bushes and watch his car go by. And all of a sudden he realized that there was no toilet paper where he put toilet paper. And he totally freaked out because he knows Mike Walker. He started his car. He took off through Mid-America parking lot through the back way, got in, He was heading to his house because he knew Mike Walker was going to his house to take everything and dump it all over his yard. No, Mike Walker had a better idea. His girlfriend Hannah, who was with him, the cohort, I went to her house. And if you know anything about Martha Hawkins, I trashed her yard with their stuff. Never heard a word about it. So when your kids drive in, the sound of their car. You know the sound of his car. You know, I could tell when Dad was coming home because I could hear that rattle in that Dodge pickup truck. And I knew it was Dad. Adam knew because he heard the sound. He's like, that's God. Walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife, what did they do? They were lost. They lost themselves. They went and hid from the presence of the Lord among the trees of the garden. Verse 9. And the Lord God called to the man and said to him, where are you? He was lost. Now, God knew where he was. But he still asked the question, where are you? Here's their response. Verse 10. I heard the sound of you in the garden. And I was what? Afraid. Because I was naked and I lost myself. I hid. I disconnected myself from you. I was afraid. And God goes on, well, why? Why would you do this? And Adam's like, well, you know that woman you gave me? He's not blaming the woman. He's blaming God. You created her for me. She screwed the whole thing up because of you, God. In all reality, that's what he's saying. He hid himself. He chose her and his relationship over his and God's relationship. He had a choice to make. When she ate of that fruit, he had a choice to make. And he chose what he could see rather than what he couldn't. So what happens? What do we do? I mean, think about it. Who chooses to be part of a family? Did you choose to be a part of your family? No, your parents had you. Now, who chooses to disconnect from a family? The person that wants to walk away. The person who says, I've had enough. I don't want this anymore. I don't want to be connected to this family. I mean, we all probably have said that at some point in our lives. I am so sick of this family, you know. I don't know if, you've said it. I know I've said it. I know my kids have said it. I hate you, to our parents. We all have done it. We all have disconnected. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. But let me ask you this question. When you met somebody and you really liked them, what did you do to keep that relationship alive? Spent time with them, right? Did you talk to them? Of course. Did you find yourself all of a sudden trying to spend more time with them? It's so funny when dating couples come to me and want to go through premarital counseling, and I usually tell them at some point, hey, you're not going to spend any more time together than you are now when you get married. And they look at each other like, what do you mean? We'll have 24 hours a day to spend together. Does that really happen, married couples? No, because the only extra time that you have to spend together, you want to what? Sleep, because you're tired and you're wore out. And so here, what happens when we disconnect, when we're lost, and all of a sudden we're found? When we decide that we're sinners and we repent and we turn back to God because we want to go back to what it originally was like Adam and Eve had it in the garden at the beginning. When we want that, and we decide, when we realize that, you know what, everything that I've went after in this life is not satisfying, I need God. I need to restore my relationship with the Father. Well, how do we do that? Look at Revelations chapter 2. God, John is writing about a church here, the 7 churches. In this one church, he says this in verse 3, as he's talking to the church. He's talking to us. I know you're enduring patiently. You're hanging in there. You're doing well. You're bearing up for my name's sake. You're working hard. You're doing what needs to be done. And you have not even grown weary. In other words, you're still reading the Bible. You're still praying. You're still witnessing. You're still doing everything that you think God wants you to do. Verse 4. But I have this against you, that you have what? Abandoned the love you had at first. You know what I think is so interesting? And this happens to all of us. We fall in love with somebody. We want to spend time with them. We want to connect with them. We want to do all this stuff. And then we decide, hey, I like you, you like me, let's spend life together. And they go, all right, let's do that, And then all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, I'm not just taking care of myself here. I've got somebody else I've got to take care of. And then all of a sudden, a little bitty one of us pops up, and then that's like, whoa, I got somebody else to take care of. And we got all these mouths to feed, and all of a sudden it's like, I want to spend time with them, but I got to provide for them. And so, we find this job, and we get focused on it. I'm going to provide for them, but, and they take more, and then I work more, and then they take more, and I work harder, and all of a sudden we're in this cycle of, wait a minute, this is what I love, but this is what I end up spending most of my time on because I'm trying to provide for them. And they're like, but what about us? And you're like, but I got to, it's like, it's like, and all of a sudden, you've abandoned your first love. They feel like you're married more to your job than you are to them. But the whole idea but I thought I needed to, So what does he tell us to do? What does he tell us to do? You've abandoned it. Do you have verse 5 there? I don't know if you have that or not. Remember, therefore, where you have fallen, and repent. And do the works you did at what? At first. Ladies, you remember how much he doted on you at the beginning? Do you remember how different he acted at the beginning? I mean, he was nice. I mean, he didn't burp in front of you until he got to know you a little bit. Then that other thing, it's like, all right, yeah, all right. So the whole idea is, we act different, right? Ladies or guys, do you remember when you take them out and they wouldn't eat? And now you make fun of them eating, I mean, the whole idea is that we act different, we do things, we're a little more, put all this stuff together. And that's really what he's saying. But think about it like this. What did you do at the beginning? You talked. You spent time together. You watched the other person to see how they would react. And then sometimes you did things to get that reaction, right? But the whole idea is, what do we do with God? The same thing, what we did at the beginning. When you first got saved and you got real excited about what God was doing in your life, and how you were trying this prayer thing out because you were trying to figure out how God is talking to us and speaking to us, and it's like, I'm gonna talk to him, and hopefully, I'll understand God talking to me back. I start reading the Word, and I don't understand everything I read, but all of a sudden, there are times that I read it, and it's like, whoa, that's me right now, And then you're looking and you're watching other people and what God's doing in their life, and you're kind of going, oh, wow, I see God working here and there, and it's like all of a sudden these things come together. And that's what he's saying. Don't get so focused just in the things that you can see and how you're trying to provide. Focus back on me, the provider. I mean, the whole idea is that being a son or a daughter in a family is not always the easiest thing. I mean, how many times have you told your siblings, I'm going to kill you? How many times have you told your parents, I don't like you anymore? How many times, parents, you told your kids, I wish I never, no, I better not go there. But the whole idea is that the process doesn't stop. You raise children, and all of a sudden they meet somebody, they marry somebody, and as grandparents, we get the best end of the deal, right? We can spoil them rotten and send them home. Buy them the drum set for Christmas and send it to their house, or the biggest noise-making machine you can find. But just the whole idea is that as a grandparent, you get to watch what God did in your life and how it's affecting their life. And that can be some of the most precious opportunities to witness. And in the same way, spiritually, when we lead people into a growing relationship with Christ, when we invest into their lives, when we spend time with them, when we show them what God is doing in our life, and then we see them taking somebody else and doing the same thing, it's like, wow. Watch God's kingdom grow. We're not worried about people that walk in the door that don't look like us or fit like us or act like us. It's more like when they walk in the door, like, yes, they're here. That's awesome. We got them to come. I've been praying for them. I've been working with them. I've been hoping that they'd walk into that door one of these days. There was a group of us that grew up together. We called ourselves the Bob Clan. And you'll probably hear more stories about the Bob Clan, but we nicknamed each other Bob. And so I was Blue Tick Bob. But Tim Bob, he's the pastor of New Life Church in Siloam. We grew up together. We were friends ever since first grade, Miss Murray's class. And he grew up as a preacher's kid, and I didn't get involved in church until later in my life. But in our high school years, we began to kind of start praying for our friends. And we realized that the other Bobs, that some of them had a relationship with God and some of them didn't. And just probably about 10 years ago, we're sitting at Tim's house for Christmas, got all the Bobs together, except one. We ended up with a phone call with him, speakerphone, and having everybody together. And Tim and I looked at each other across the table, and it hit us just like that. And we both realized, and we winked at each other at the same time because of what we were talking about, that all of the Bobs have a relationship with God. That the last one finally made that choice to accept Christ. And it was like, yes! It was a celebration. And it's so cool to be able to see that and witness that. And we want to see that over and over and over in our lives. So take those opportunities to get to know your family, your friends, your neighbors, and invest into them in such a way as to be the light in dark places, so that you can lead them into a growing relationship with Christ, so they can lead others into a growing relationship with Christ, so that we can build a family. See, that to me, that's probably the best part about God's family. The family that you grew up in, you didn't get a choice of who, what, where, when. But in God's family, you get a choice of who you get to invest in. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes God just brings somebody in your life that you're like, I don't know how this would ever work, but God's got it working out. So I want to encourage you. Be a light in a dark place. Follow your dreams and your passions and desires in the way that God has designed you and wired you for His kingdom. Leverage it for Him. Use those opportunities to take and be diligent in seeking and saving those who are lost. And you can't save them. Christ is, but you lift Christ up, they'll be drawn to Him. He says that. They'll be drawn to Him. So I want to encourage you. Be about what Jesus was about. Preaching the good news, helping those who are sick and needy and weak and worn, and driving out evil wherever you see it. Let's pray.